Welcome to the MemberWise Best Practice series. This video is brought to you today by the MemberWise Network, the leading free-to-join best practice network for membership and association professionals. We hope that you enjoy this great presentation, and for further information about our growing network, please visit www.memberwise.org.uk.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for coming to my session. Priceless has kind of knocked me back. I was going to say there's a risk some of this might be a bit grandmother and apple pie. Some of it might be a little bit obvious, but it's also the thing we see again and again and again. So hopefully you'll find it useful. My boss does lots of these presentations. He really quite enjoys it. I have to admit it's not my cup of tea. I did a dummy run a couple of days ago with my 3 daughters. My 7-year-old was most interested in the bears. My 11-year-old was just perplexed, and the 13-year-old told me to say less and get a haircut. So I did the haircut. But we'll soon find out whether I say enough or not enough. I'm not adverse to people interrupting. If people have got questions, please fire them in. And if I'm rambling, someone shout ramble. I won't mind, and I'll speed up. Okay, so this is a bit of an introduction. It's not an agenda as such. It's context rather than an agenda. I thought it was useful to define digital and explain what we mean by digital. It's kind of obvious, but it's probably going to have some front end. The more technical people will realise it's probably got some back end. Some of the suppliers might say you can do both in the same place. End users, interface, mobile apps, mobile phones, anything in that arena is what I'm talking about. Digital strategy. I think 5-6 years ago, I can't remember a client saying we want some help with digital strategy. Now an awful lot of clients are saying we want help with digital strategy. Some clients are saying we want some help with engagement strategy. That's even more modern. I get ever so cautious about any separation. I think business strategy, technology strategy, digital strategy, engagement strategy need at least to be aligned, if not contained within the same strategy. But it's important to define what we mean by those. Data closer to the web. I hope it don't sound cynical, but I thought this was marketeers, and apologies to marketeers in the room. Data closer to the web, what does it really mean? Does it matter? And I think it does matter. And the idea is that by having the data, the member, within the CMS or closer to the web, in some way it may be easier to understand, profile, segment, engagement score. I think I balanced that by saying that a well-designed, well-integrated, best-of-breed system with a CMS and with a database or a CRM can work just as well. But people are talking about bringing things closer to the web, and the web being the shop front for your organization where people engage. Marketing or tech. Digital projects seem to emanate from marketing, which is not altogether surprising. Not a problem with that at all, as long as it doesn't emanate from marketing without the involvement of technology. Because too often we arrive at client sites and find marketing have gone and got something. It probably works. It's probably quite interesting. But trying to scale it or integrate it or get it to work with IT becomes a real problem. And IT become the naysayers, the people who won't support it, can't support it. Equally, I get annoyed when IT delay things. Oh no, it's not going to work with our great big system. So your really small thing in marketing, which is going to add great value to your end users, you can't do it. That's equally nonsense. So both parties should collaborate and focus on trying to get to value reasonably quickly. So this session, I'll get to the point in a second. Initiation, I'm going to talk about start of a project. I'm going to talk a lot about value. Capability is an interesting one, I hope. Implementation, but importantly, I'm going to try and spin through 4 case studies. So 4 clients where there's real examples of the things which we find. I'm probably not going to reference back to bear traps often enough, but it should focus around 4 case studies. So, sorry, just a quick one on Indigo Blue. Been around a fair while, 13, 14 years. Recently taken over by an Indian development company called Maztec. Lot of sector experience. Most of our sales stuff goes out saying we've worked with 30 or 40 third sector membership association type clients. I thought I'd do a quick count on Sunday night. It's about 60, 65 in total. Varying scale, some short engagements, some very large engagements. We've got a good awareness of the technology, the environment, the operating environment, the processes, the governance structures which work in your sector. I'm taking a risk here, and Richard's not happy with it. I'm running 2 screens. I've got mine, and also what's up there. Okay, the top of this slide says say less, so I'll try and go through fairly quickly. I'm going to mention the word agile once. Indigo Blue are a specialist agile consultancy. There's a lot of myths which need debunking around agile, and one of them is that a plan is not a good thing. A specification is not a good thing. We're very pro planning and designing as a good idea. If you don't know what you're planning on doing, how do you know if you're ever going to get there? How can you expect people to release funds on the basis that, well, you know, it'll be fine, it'll be really good when we get it? Equally important is don't over-initiate. And what we mean by that is you can start, particularly in digital areas, more quickly than in some traditional infrastructure areas. Start as soon as you're confident enough that what you're going to do is going to deliver value at an acceptable risk appetite. And something we talk a lot about, and I'm not going to go any depth now, is managing uncertainty. But the traditional approach is to sign everything off through a specification, which is full of assumptions, and then think you've nailed it, start, and then get to the end and realise it's not what you want. We're far more interested in incremental, do something, show the client, change it, do something, show the client, change it. And that should come out a little bit more as I present and go through this. So the last comment is, try and set up a governance environment which you can manage and work in, but it's not a constraint. It doesn't tie you down and stop you from progressing. Sorry. Okay, so I won't stay on this slide for very long, but this is, again, look at the vision, so look at the high level. How much analysis around processes? You don't need to document everything you currently do. It's useful to know what you do currently, but you haven't got to go into great big war and peace documentation. So requirements, thinking out of the box. I'm always slightly suspicious of this statement. If you're encouraging people to innovate, make sure they're true to themselves and they're doing something which is relevant and useful in terms of what your end users want. We're working at a large retailer at the moment, and the head architect has an idea of moving a load of code from the website into a back end. It's actually not a bad idea. His reason for doing it, and he's trying to get a lot of funding from the board, is it'll make the checkout quicker. It sounds very credible, but when you actually use the website currently, the checkout's really quick. There isn't a problem. It's actually working quite well. And his whole rationale and reason for doing it is predicated on something else, but he's not true to himself and he's not thinking of value in terms of end user. So the importance is always think of value in terms of end user. Okay. Ministry of Justice. Apologies, this is not strictly speaking third sector or membership, but there's some interesting messages in here which will hopefully build as I go through the presentation. It's a major programme. It's £50 million plus. It's in the press a fair bit. It's a complex system. It's complex because it's end-to-end in terms of the process. It's all stakeholders, all crime types. It's quite high profile. There's nothing more than the press or the right-wing press will like to start saying that justice isn't being delivered properly or effectively. We got involved in the planning process at the start, and we ran some value mapping process workshops with the executives at the MOJ. And the outcome of that was quite different to what they originally planned to do. They weren't going to go for a big bang, but they were going for quite a feature-based approach. And by feature, it might have been deal with lawyers, then deal with the assistants in the court, then deal with the victims. Whereas what we actually, I guess, persuaded or agreed on would be the right approach was to go for what we call a full end-to-end stripe, but also on something which was going to have a big impact, which apparently one of the biggest crimes which they deal with is TfL fare dodging. I use a tube every day, and I don't think I've ever seen a fare dodger, but apparently it's one of the most common crime types. So what they built was, or we helped them build, or project managed, was an end-to-end stripe, a true working system from start to end. Now, it's obviously digital, it's enabled as a front end, it's accessed through a portal, but the real advantage of doing the full end-to-end stripe is you've got a prototype system. You've got something which you can then build out from vertically, rather than just an isolated feature. And it's an interesting way of thinking about how you plan your projects if you're not doing them big bang, which I hope you don't. In terms of membership sector, there's lots of applicability in terms of how you do it. I can think of good projects which have built out from feature. I can think of good projects which go full stripe. But the point I'm trying to make is think about how you plan your project and think about end user value as often as you can. Okay, walk, run, fly. This is important. I think it's particularly important in digital. The market is full of suppliers selling products, and it's a market where I think people feel that if you're not doing something, you're missing out. And potentially you probably are, but you're not quite sure what you're missing out on. And you need to be cautious about being, I guess, in the hands of suppliers. I'm a supplier. You need to think about what it is you need and what the supplier is going to do to deliver that. A particular problem I see, and this tends to happen in marketing automation, communications around marketing database, is people try and reach what we call the high-hanging fruit first. And they don't think about what they currently do or how they currently do it. So if the height of your current ambitions or capability is to send out the same HTML email to all your members once a month, okay, build on that incrementally, do it a bit better, personalize that email first, collect some information into the database or the web layer and start to personalize. What we find is people are sold in on the high features and there's a lack of capability, experience or capacity to deliver on it. So be cautious of high-hanging fruit and build up your capability and think about what's going to make a difference. People who say emails are dead or email newsletters are dead are wrong. But it's quite important to send something which is relevant. Otherwise, I'm not going to look at it. I'm just going to put it straight into the bin, which achieves nothing. In fact, it probably irritates and maybe even ends up as spam. Capability is interesting. And this is not exclusive to your sector. Particularly in marketing automation, website engagement, segmentation. Once you've got this all singing and dancing tool, you've got to put a lot of effort into tooling up your people and developing your people to use it. Again, the marketing executive or IT executive who's been sending out that email and compiling that email once a month, if you give them a tool like, it's a perfectly good tool like Marketo, for example, or Zuhora, or Silverpop, or something like that, although the suppliers will say it's dead easy, it's a half-hour course, a couple of online videos, and you're home and dry. It's not. To really leverage the advantage from it, you need to invest in your team. So the bear trap is, don't buy something you can't use. You'll never leverage the return on investment if you do it that way. Okay. I don't know why this is a feature of digital, but on a number of the websites and CMS/app projects we've worked on recently, the classic response once development starts going into test and the first time the end user or the client sees something is, that's not what I meant. It really isn't what I meant. And then you get into all sorts of challenges which can be supported by a governance process or a good governance process and some honesty and some communication, but does start to create tension. And unfortunately, the traditional solution is to specify stuff to death, which is a paradox winding back to the start, great big functional specifications. Trouble with those things is people don't read them, particularly people signing them off. So the CEO, CTO, marketing director will sign off a specification. Your agency will probably go and deliver it, hopefully, and it's still not what you really thought. Is the solution wireframe everything to death? Sitemap everything to death? Probably not. I would also suggest a good way of doing it is to try and do it as you go along. So develop, show somebody, is this what you meant? Sign off. But both parties have to be organised to deal with that. And suppliers often are, clients often aren't. So an investment often needs to be made by the supplier or the project management organisation to get the client, i.e. the membership organisation, geared up for that type of iterative approach. But it really can work. Content. Hands up here, anyone who's migrated a website. Was migrating the content a joy? Was it really easy? No. It's not a particularly technical task. It's often underestimated, and I've made the mistake in the past. You've got to be so careful not to underestimate the effort necessary to migrate content effectively. tends to be this little dot on a Gantt chart. Content, that's dead easy. There's no design, not much sign-off. But there's a lot of help, a lot of resources out there about how to do this well. Start with an audit, have a look at what's there. It's a huge opportunity to do less. If the minutes from the trustee meeting from 1987 are still on your website, hopefully when you're finished, they shouldn't be. Please don't. Don't delete them, archive them, put them somewhere else. But there is a whole resource plan needed around the process of audit, cull, edit, copy. Copy guide. Do you want your website to look like it's written by 13 different people, 12 of whom are in a rush? It's probably useful to try and get some consistency. You spent all this money in your great design, your great website, your performance CMS, but you want to make sure it's written properly. It's also a big opportunity to plan incrementally, because you haven't got to do all the content to a perfect standard before you go live. You can continue to improve it post-go live, but pay attention to content. Similar message around testing. Sounds obvious. A couple of tips around testing is at the initiation stage, be exceptionally clear with the supplier about who's doing what. So you hope your supplier will test stuff before they give it to you. Sometimes when you receive it, you may wonder whether they have or not. If they haven't, it's probably because they're rushing. It's probably because there's pressure, unrealistic timetables. Rarely is any supplier going to hand something over intentionally wrong, but when the pressure's on, you can sometimes wonder. But from the outset, who's going to write the scripts? How are you going to do UAT? Who's going to resource it? Who's going to train the resources in terms of how to do it? What's the comms around it? How's it going to work? I've seen cracking relationships break up at the point of test, when in fact, the difference between what was expected and what was coming across was marginal, and it could have been dealt with quite easily. But that point of tension can cause quite a lot of stress on the project. Governance, we did quite a lot of work in governance, particularly in government rather than third sector. People overlook it because it's boring. But having a proper governance process with regular, impactful reporting, with meetings based around governance, with outcomes, so stop, continue, pause, replan. But having that reporting, by exception to senior stakeholders, is critical. Be terribly cautious, particularly the CEO. Apologies, any CEOs here, who just wants to know when it's finished. Because they are a pain in the backside when it gets towards the end and it's not quite finished. And be particularly careful of the CEO who comes up with a new requirement 3 days before go live, which he has to have because he's a CEO. And there's a bit of I'm sorry, it's an anecdote or a phrase which consultants use, there's no change without cost. It doesn't mean it costs more money, but if the CEO wants something 3 days before it goes live, well, maybe it'll be later, maybe you'll do less, or maybe it'll cost more. But you can't just do stuff, particularly 3 days before you're about to deploy. And that's a real recent experience. And the client's in the room, so I'm not going to go any further. That's what I mean by definition of done. Define the point at which you're able to go live. And that's a real hard message, because a lot of people think it's got to be all perfect. It hasn't. It's got to offer enough value to be worthwhile when you put it live. Some people use the word minimum viable product. It's a phrase I hate, because minimum sounds negative. But it's the product which is good enough to delight the end user and offer enough value. That's important. So, Youth Hostel Association. This is a project we did a while ago. Real success, and one which I think is recognised sort of widely. People know about it as being successful. It's currently nominated as Best Digital Project in the British Computer Society Awards. It was posited as a CRM website project. We became involved in helping with the planning and the digital strategy in particular. And the first thing sounds like it happened immediately, but the plan which resulted didn't deal with CRM or website first, which one might expect on a CRM website project. The organisation, with some help, identified that billing was a problem. Billing's important. It brings in the revenue, which is really important. So the first step in the plan was to update the billing engine. It's quite dull. There's no nice wireframes. There's no exciting design. There's update a billing engine. The second thing was really important. This business is about selling rooms at low cost, 2 families, got some fantastic venues and locations. Really, some of them are quite unbelievable. They spent a lot of money investing in their assets, in their rooms and that. The next step was to, again, looking at value, was to go to the booking agencies, so late room, those sorts of places. So integrate in there. Then into the website, and it's a key message about without CRM integration, and then into CRM without website integration. Creating the builds of the projects without adding the complexity of doing them both at the same time, in terms of having two moving feasts, was kind of part of the plan, because there was time to do it. What happened in practice was that, of course, pressure came on, did two things at once, and some of the effort around testing, improving function and data between a database and a CMS became quite complex. I'm just going to talk about that a little bit more on the next case study, which hopefully I've got this right, is chemical, yes. Okay, so iChemie. I think there's some guys from Advanced here, or they're in this room, but I saw them on the list, yeah. It's probably, I think, one of the best installations of NG that's been done in the sector. It's really quite successful. They're quite delighted with it. It fell into the moving feast problem at the start, where it was implementing new function and new data. And when this was put into test and it wasn't working, it was very difficult to tell what was wrong. Was it the data, was it the function? So you're trying to do two things at once. And the very simple revision to the approach, and the more technical guys in here will recognize this, was to create proper test data. Real test data you're absolutely confident in, prove the test data, then test the function against the test data. So if you know the answer's wrong at the end, it's because of the function. So once you're confident the function's working, then load live data in. That separation of those moving feasts with proper regressive testing, so you can run back through the whole lot without any real effort, proved a great success. And there was a big advantage as, again, anyone who's implemented these sorts of projects, you've ended up effectively with a live test of your data. And data is often where you get an awful lot of the problems. So this next slide, I'll be quite brief on. It really just summarizes the idea of showing things. So an alpha-beta type concept, looking at live data, building in regression around the testing. Also unit testing. We're quite a fan of unit testing. Interesting stories. One of the best developers I know. I don't do unit testing. Waste of time. Waste of time. My code's so good, the effort it would take to fix something, if it ever went wrong, is way less than doing unit testing right through. Until, and he's the kind of developer who uses the word dude and cool quite a lot, until I got a phone call just prior to implementation saying he hadn't been to bed for about 2 days because he had no unit tests. He'd found a bug and running it back through the whole system. He hadn't been to bed. None of his team had been to bed for 2 or 3 days trying to work out the impact of the change they'd made. And it was because they didn't have unit testing or automated regression through the process. So this is an iterative picture. I think it's from the government Agile handbook. So analysis stream, constantly reviewing what you're doing, build, configure, test, move on. Build, configure, test, move on. It's an approach we would suggest works. So, apologies for the picture. That's meant to be a toilet roll. I'm going to lead up to our last case study in a second. Cutting your losses is hard, and I've been on projects where I feel the pressure to say through my reporting, through my governance process, yeah, it's just about on track. And kind of deep down you think, oh, God, there's no chance. There's no chance. At some point, it's like Project Poker. At some point, someone's going to have to say, well, actually, it's not going to work. And there's a real message here that if things aren't working, there's something you should do about it. And that's certainly not just throwing more and more money at it. Kind of trust your instinct. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. I mentioned before about measurement checkpoints in your governance process. You need to build a relationship with the supplier and have some honesty about what's happening. There's a project where we're probably going to lose fairly soon to one of the big systems integrators, so Capgemini, Accenture. Almost certainly we'll lose it, which is fair enough. But if we were to win it, the first thing we'd say to the board is that can't be delivered. That can't be done, even if you throw an army of people at it. So you're setting yourself up for a failure. So let's have some honesty and replan it realistically, or reduce the scope and do less, but still deliver value. And I mentioned the word independent opinion. We sometimes get called in to do this, and we've had it done to us. On occasions, if you're not sure the supplier is, I won't use the word honest, but realistic, get someone else to take a look. An independent person just to say, not quite, or in fact that could be done if you do the following. But just don't keep relentlessly pressing forward if it's not going to work. So, last case study, Hive, creative skill set, cracking project. It's worth going to the site and taking a look. It's in the arts, and it's a social media application designed to encourage collaboration in the arts. A lot of budget, a lot of sponsorship, Channel 4, BBC, Sky, a lot of the games type companies are involved. I'm afraid it didn't go particularly well to start off with. In fact, it went quite badly. We were involved at the start. There was too much new stuff and too much bleeding edge, kind of for the sake of it. It was architected incorrectly. Luckily, we caveated that at the start, which was a get-out-of-jail card for us. It was architected as a CMS, as a website, and CMS is really for publishing few to many, whereas this is social media, which is really publishing many to many. So the architecture was kind of flawed. It needed an application rather than a CMS. The supplier, who are extremely large, one of the biggest in Europe, chose the wrong CMS because they thought it would be interesting. Do you want your project to be predicated on an interesting CMS? Well, we couldn't find resources to do it, where there's no features or assets. I hope no one's here from that organisation, actually. Where there's no assets to build from. So it was fairly crap, I'm afraid. We did do alpha beta, which was handy. And the alpha beta product, particularly at the beta stage, allowed us to look at it and say, no chance. And a lot of money had been spent at that point. And it was a fairly brave decision taken by the client at that point to change supplier. Luckily not change project management company. We survived that process. And we facilitated the change to supplier. Re-architected it. Went for a different approach with a far lighter use of a CMS. And delivered the beta to market in, I think in my notes, it's 16 weeks. Sorry, 22 weeks for a beta and 32 weeks for live. And it's a real success. It's not yet self-funding, but it's starting to generate money, which in this sector is important. It'll start to pay for itself, hopefully. And it's nominated at the BCS Awards alongside YHA for Best Digital Project. This one's mine, which I hope wins. And apologies if YHA here. YHA is my bosses, so I hope they come second. Right, I'm rambling. I think that's probably the last slide. Thank you, and I think I'm going over there for questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Anthony. That was a great session. Give a round of applause. So what I'd just say is, just within the last couple of minutes, one of the things that you mentioned there, and I think scope creep can come from anywhere in terms of boards, in terms of council members, chief executives, and it's all meant for the right reasons. They just want something great. What can we do to avoid scope creep realistically from someone, say, maybe at a director, manager level? What can we do to make it not happen?
I in fact wouldn't try to avoid it. I just have a process for dealing it and recognise that change is going to happen. Recognise absolutely why shouldn't the director think of something new they want or change what they've originally specified. You just need a good, robust change management process. And be exceptionally cautious of the supplier who says we don't need a change management process. We can just do it. It's really important to have just a robust, quite traditional change management process. Not one which has got pages and pages of stuff and becomes an obstacle, but just a process for managing change is critical.
And again, the network, we come across quite a few people who are obviously going through this process. And one of the things that I've certainly noticed, I kind of have offline conversations with people and they'll say, oh, what do you think to so-and-so, or how's this done, or how's that done? And one thing that I keep seeing is under-resourced, but not from a cash perspective, but from an actual resource perspective, as in staff.
Yeah.
I don't know, have you made any observations within the sector, or maybe how we could improve on that?
Yeah, I'll be careful not to sound like a sales pitch. Project management is underestimated as a process or skill set. I had a bit of a debate with an accountant recently who said he couldn't afford to pay for project management, and after all, it's really quite easy. To which I said, no problem, you do the project and I'll do your year-end accounts. And he sort of stopped and thought about it. You need somebody who is good to work between the client and the supplier and to provide some project management. That can really work in the supplier's favour and the client's favour, which should be a mutual favour. Mm-hmm. But certainly don't underestimate the effort needed on project management. A good person can pick it up and do it, but when it starts to hit the fan a little bit, particularly around testing, particularly around that's not what I meant, particularly around delays to go live. Unless you've got someone who's credible, senior sponsorship, then there's a real struggle there. So I would encourage some good project management.
And another killer question, there may not be an answer to this, but when it comes to contingency, if in terms of a project as a percentage, what would you say would be a sensible figure for anyone thinking to embark on a project, just to make sure?
Yeah, we look at contingency in different ways. I'm loath to say 10%, 15%. I'm suspicious of anyone who can estimate let's say a £200,000 project and say it's going to be £192,780. I'd rather they came back and say it's going to be between 170, 190, top end 205. I'd encourage people to budget around the top end and just have a good communication process for any variance around the midpoint and hope that it comes in around the midpoint. Contingency, people tend to treat almost like a kind of slush fund. I know people, you might sit down and think a supplier will treat the difference between the midpoint and the top end as a slush fund, but my experience is they come in broadly around the mid-end or slightly above the mid-end. Cautious of fixed price. You can do fixed price as long as you fix the scope, but how can you fix the scope if there's going to be change? So something like CAP T&M, something like that tends to work quite well.
Okay, well, Anthony, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Okay.